Throughout America's sea of history, there have only been a handful of events that have thoroughly influenced global affairs. Out of this handful, one stands above the rest, this event having permanently changed the geopolitical landscape as well as forever restructuring the implications of war. This event was But how did Nuclear fission is the process by which an atom's nucleus, or core, is split into two or smaller nuclei, releasing energy in the process. This process is the core concept of the atomic bomb, but how do you split an atom, not even mention its unobservable nucleus? In 1932, the neutron was discovered. Since a neutron has no charge, a rather weak neutron can overpower the repelling force of an atom's nucleus and split it. Weak neutrons were in abundance, and if you pelted enough neutrons at a tiny minuscule nucleus, one would eventually hit. In 1934, Enrico Fermi tested this theory and fired at an uranium atom with an artillery of neutrons and produced what he thought at the time were new elements that were heavier than uranium. His findings aligned with the majority scientific consensus at the time that neutrons could only induce minuscule changes in an atom, such as changing the number of protons or neutrons. Nobody ever even entertained the fact that the atom could ever split into two lighter products. In 1938, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, performed Fermi's experiment to try to replicate his results from 1934, and they found strange byproducts of barium. A year later in 1939, Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch attempted to explain the byproducts of barium and theoretically concluded that the atom had in fact burst, splitting into two smaller products, providing the first explanation of nuclear fission. A breakthrough had just been made. The discovery rapidly shot around the globe, and soon after, the theoretical concept of the atomic bomb was drafted in the same year. Physicists theorized that if the amount of neutrons released in the initial nuclear fission reaction was high enough, then that could trigger another fission reaction, which could trigger another, and so on, causing a chain reaction that released an astronomical amount of energy. Harnessing this burst of energy is the foundation of the atomic bomb. The increasing tensions following World War I meant that the utility and devastation that could be brought by such a superweapon was evidently favorable, and it seemed that every nation mutually wanted to be the first to attain it. And so, the race was on. Immediately, the concept of the atomic bomb alarmed scientists around the globe, most notably Albert Einstein, who drafted the Einstein-Szilard letter with another physicist, Leo Szilard, warning of the potent potential of the atomic bomb. Quote, "This new phenomenon may lead to the construction of bombs, and it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type thus must be constructed. A single bomb of this type, carried by a boat and exploded in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory." The letter was presented to then-President Franklin Roosevelt, and with the amount and pressure of a possible mirror German atomic bomb project, the letter was signed. Roosevelt appointed an advisory committee on uranium, and just 2 short months later, on November 1st, 1939, the committee reported back that a chain reaction in uranium would be possible. The theory of the bomb had just become a reality. December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. December 8th, 1941, the United States declares war against Japan, officially entering World War II. This immediately prompted an unprecedented growth of funding for the research of nuclear reactions. In August 1942, the Manhattan Engineer District was established in New York, officially marking the beginning of the Manhattan Project. General Leslie Groves was appointed as head of the district, who quickly aimed to jumpstart research. Groves selected a site in Tennessee built up Oak Ridge to host thousands of researchers and workers in a variety of facilities crucial to the operation, and appointed a now famous name, J. Robert Oppenheimer, as director of the new Los Alamos laboratory. A third site was also constructed in Hanford, Washington, which produced the plutonium isotope needed for nuclear fission. December 1942, Enrico Fermi, the person who first accidentally discovered the byproducts of nuclear fission, also became the first person to successfully produce a controlled nuclear chain reaction. In April 1943, Oppenheimer made advancements in fission technology, most notably optimizing the amount of material needed for a chain nuclear reaction and rendering it manufacturable. August 1943, Britain and Canada joined the United States nuclear research effort. Summer 1945, the amount of the plutonium isotope required for a nuclear explosion was fully finalized at the Hanford site in Washington. Everything was coming together, and it seemed like the atomic bomb was closer to becoming a reality than ever. And indeed, it was.
There were tensions regarding how to test the bomb. Groves, a military leader, was reluctant to test the bomb at all, or at most a small-scale test with scaled-down proportions of materials, since a full test would decrease an already heavily limited supply of plutonium. Oppenheimer, a physicist, was on the opposite side of the spectrum, and thought that a full-scale test of the bomb would be counterintuitively easier to control, because the calculations made the explosion easier to predict. With much negotiation, Groves signed off on a full test with the question of how, but once it was answered, there was one left: where? The process for selecting a place to test the bomb began in 1944. It was immediately apparent that the location had to be remote, in case of a failed test spreading to sample the plutonium, which would endanger any humans in the radius of the drop zone. A successful test would also have a radioactive fallout, which would similarly endanger any humans even relatively nearby, but several designs were also drafted to recover any plutonium that might be left over from a partially successful or failed attempt. The climate and weather were also important factors, making a desert the most optimal biome. A laboratory seemingly sprung from the sand to measure and collect data from the explosion. All preparations and precautions were set in place, and therefore the test could commence. The date is July 16, 1945, at 5:30 a.m. The bomb gadget was lifted 100 feet off the ground and onto a steel tower, zero. The site at which the test was to take place was dubbed Trinity, located at the Alamogordo Air Base, 120 miles south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The term Ground Zero, which is defined as the area directly below an exploding nuclear bomb, was coined here. It began with an intense flash of light and sudden waves of heat overtaking the area, as well as a massive shock wave echoing through the valley. A ball of fire immediately rose from the explosion, followed by a mushroom cloud extending to 40,000 feet. It generated an explosive kind of power that mankind has never witnessed before, estimated to be from 15,000 to 20,000 tons of explosives. The tower was completely vaporized, and the explosion infused the desert sand in a radius of about 800 yards of glass.
On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb named Little Boy was dropped over Hiroshima. Little Boy was roughly half as powerful as the gadget bomb, but still managed to cause irreparable damage to Hiroshima, with 70% of its buildings being destroyed and a further 7% damaged. A second bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, instantly vaporizing around half of the city and instantly killing 40,000 people and injuring a further 60,000, which caused Japan to surrender on August 14, 1945. The total number of deaths in both cities is estimated to be 340,000 over 5 years due to the radiation. However, despite the philosophy and morals of the bombing, the Manhattan Project is still widely celebrated as ending World War II. As soon as Japan surrendered, the war was essentially over. The stockpiling of nuclear weapons began, and further research into atomic energy yielded even more discoveries in the nuclear field, such as nuclear energy. The Manhattan Project was a turning point in history that brought the world into the atomic age, the benefits and consequences of which can still be felt.